Hello and welcome to ATG the podcast, and I'm very pleased to be talking to Zakayo Kjellstrom today. Zakayo, good to talk to you.
Very nice to talk to you too, Michael.
So Zakayo, can we start right at the beginning? You're from Sweden, I believe. So whereabouts were you born?
I was born in sort of the middle of Sweden I guess if you're from Stockholm, it's the north of Sweden, which is everything north of Stockholm. But it geographically, it's the middle of Sweden in a region called Dalarna and in a small town called Falun. It's not necessarily very small. It's a small town comparatively. And I lived there for the first 10 years of my life before moving to Stockholm, where I've lived ever since, with a few exceptions for university studies. Yeah.
Okay, and what did you study at university?
So first I studied in Lund, which is all the way down in the south of Sweden. It is a very old university city. I think the university there started 1666, and I studied a bachelor in cultural studies with a focus on digital culture, I believe is the English title of my bachelor program. And I did that program for 3 years. Was sort of clueless with what I wanted to do prior to going into the program, but it sort of crystallized towards the end that I wanted to do something a bit more practical, a bit more hands-on, something that also resulted in a concrete title and a concrete, place of work, which sort of ended up being librarianship for me. So I applied to the 2-year Masters in Library Science at the same university, and I ended up staying 2 more years in Lund, actually 3 more years, because I also worked a year at the university library in Lund. So I spent a total of 6 years there, give or take a few months. Yeah,
Fascinating. So you're a trained librarian.
I
Excellent.
am a trained librarian. Yeah.
And how did you get involved? The reason we're talking today is because you've just completed a PhD on what you call shadow libraries. So where did the interest in shadow libraries come from?
It came during my studies to become a librarian. We had a series of guest lecturers that came in, both academic and professional, and one of them was from a Swedish agency called the Swedish Agency for, I guess, like accessible media. What they do is it's an agency that works with making accessible books, primarily for people with learning or various learning disabilities or dyslexia or problems with their eyesight or hearing or what so on and so forth. So they produce media, accessible media essentially, uh, free of cost for the Swedish studying youth. Essentially, I think is the primary target group. But he had previously, as part of his studies, come across shadow libraries and was regularly invited to speak about shadow libraries as a part of a sort of wider perspective on accessibility and media. You see this sort of line that, or the boundaries between here are sort of not crystal clear, but they became crystal clear during his very good lecture, in which towards the end he mentioned shadow libraries, and this very much sort of piqued my interest. I had previously, during my bachelor studies, worked quite closely with different forms of piracy, not like explicitly in a thesis or anything, but in minor works throughout my bachelor studies. And I had an interest in piracy, sort of, uh, I guess, partly driven by, being a young male in Sweden. You are a pirate at some point in time. uh, but also because of the wider culture around it, and specifically the wider culture in Sweden at this point in time. This was 2011, so this is right at the precipice of the pirate bay shutting down, sort of in this big ball of fire, which it is later uh, come back again. But so this was sort of things that were happening in Sweden at the same time. So I was interested in piracy, and he gave me a sort of new perspective on piracy. This was the academic piracy, which shadow libraries at the time signified for me. So I also wrote my master's thesis about shadow libraries. So it was I guess, love at first sight, if you can call it that.
So let's talk a bit more about shadow libraries. So why should we be interested in shadow libraries? After all, they're sort of, there's counterfeit goods everywhere. There's sort of fakery all over the place, but we don't take an interest in it. So why should we take an interest?
I think shadow libraries are sort of this brilliant expression of every industry has their one thing that doesn't really work fully. And within academia, the one thing that doesn't really fully work is publishing. And I think this is something that every academic can get behind. There are obviously initiatives to mitigate the way the publishing works today, but I think shadow libraries sort of put the finger on the very issue of publishing in a very explicit way. This need to circumvent very robust traditional infrastructures in order to get what's needed to do your job, which I think is a very sort of unique thing considering uh, the lineage of academia, so sort of the history of academia. It's one of the most robust institutions we have, and its core, one of its core duties is research, and having issue with getting access to and publishing research seems almost ridiculous to anyone outside of academia who gets introduced to the system in which we are all sort of inside. So I think black open access or shadow libraries or whatever you want to call it is this beautiful expression of the problem of academia. Uh, and academics like problems. I like problems, and it's sort of a fun nut to not necessarily crack, but maybe polish a bit or work around the edges. So I think that's why shadow libraries are important.
So you're saying, I remember one librarian saying that all her training was about providing access to content, but when it came to professional practice, she spent her life restricting access to content.
Yeah, I think that that's a very good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned there's various names for it. So shadow libraries, black open access I think is the title of your thesis. I think text piracy is another one. So are they all describing the same thing?
Essentially, yeah. Black open access, as I've seen it, in sort of the taxonomy of this, black open access is the sort of overbearing, the top umbrella, if you want to say, here, and the branches from there are sort of expressed in a variety of different ways. There are people who talk about this sort of casual sharing of texts across social media as black open access, because what you're doing there is essentially circumventing uh, publisher repositories or databases to directly send texts in between, say, researchers or someone coming from outside uh, asking a researcher for a specific text. There are these Facebook groups or Twitter, now X initiatives, where you share across institutional boundaries. You do this sort of um, amateur interlibrary loan schemes between users that have perhaps institutional access to, say, a De Gruyter, but not a Brill publication, if you want to just give an example. So that essentially it is all sort of this informal sharing of text. But then you have the more systematic and put together and I guess more carefully structured platforms for sharing with the singular purpose of creating a space where you can access what you need regardless of what it is. And these are the shadow library sites. So they exist within this umbrella or taxonomy or whatever you want to call it, but are distinct in the way that they are specifically designed for you to come in there and download literature. They don't have this sort of loose peer-to-peer in a traditional, not online sense, way of sharing. Even though peer-to-peer, I feel like that was, I opened a bit of a bit of a Pandora's box saying peer-to-peer there, but I think you get what I mean.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we've all heard of Sci-Hub, but actually there's more than one, and they tend to sort of come and go a little bit. So how many are there?
That is an excellent question. There are so many, and they are. I think it's to start off with. I think it's good to speak of the larger ones, which is Sci-Hub, Library Genesis, Anna's Archive, and Zed Library. And just as you said, they come and go. Now, Library Genesis has been offline for a few, I think a month or so now, and Anna's Archive recently had one of their main domains, the .org domain, shut down. And it's very funny for someone like me who is a sort of shadow library researcher, if that's, I guess that's what I am. Whenever that happens, there's always a buzz in my phone, 4 to 5 old colleagues or friends saying, Anna's Archive's gone, Library Genesis is gone, where do I go? What do I do? What is going on here? So I just found out yesterday, due to the fact that one of my friend who is currently a student texted me and said, "Anna's archive's gone. What do I do, Zakayo? What do I do?" So when asking what shadow libraries they are, so those are the big main ones. They come and go, but despite not being here right now, take for example Library Genesis, I think they will come back. It's too robust of an infrastructure to disappear completely. They've been online for roughly 15 years, I think more even, and I think they'll come back. Now, when it comes to the minor shadow libraries, that's where it really starts to become a ecosystem of variety that can sprawl in a series of directions. You have shadow libraries that are built on ways that you collect, so memory of the world, for example, which allows users to share private sections, their private sort of libraries onto the platform, and this is sort of a fluctuating system working off the idea that if everyone is a librarian, the library is everywhere. That's sort of their tagline, and they have this idea of curating and sharing that is unique for memory of the world, and this means that whatever you find there is might be different from day to day. And then you have unfortunately now defunct arg.fail, which was the project by Sean Dockeray, who's an excellent scholar in media studies. And he created this originally as a sort of a discussion forum on arts and art for artists, architects. Let me see here, archivists, and something else, and that's the sort of A's in the ARG.
Mm.
And it's a research group, I think, or something. And then it sort of developed into a shadow library with a specific focus on obviously arts, archive, architect, and critical theory. And then there's, shadow libraries that are Chinese. You have 99lib. The Chinese have a
Mm.
lot of different shadow libraries, and I'd be scared to say that I mention even more than 99lib. That's the only one I know. You have bib.me. You have
Mm.
so many, so many. So uh, it's hard to say. And considering how the sort of the general idea of shadow libraries is that they're built on this foundation of a radical openness, meaning that you generally can copy large parts of their collection for yourself, meaning that it's quite simple. I mean, not necessarily economically, because it costs quite a lot of money to host servers and so on and so forth, but in ways of technologically hosting a shadow library, it's quite simple. So it's very easy for a layman to start their own shadow libraries, which means that the sprawl obviously is very fluctuating and going in, expanding and becoming smaller. I think every second of every day.
Mm.
So yeah,
And I think you mentioned in your thesis that, or I read somewhere that they also copy each other. So what you
yeah,
see on one is often sort of taken from one of the others.
yeah. And I mean, this is the basis of Anna's archive. They originally started as something called the Pirate Library Mirror or Pliny before they became Anna's archive, and their general focus then was just mirroring shadow library sites in a variety of ways. And now Anna's archive still does that. They have these large torrents and these large databases with all the metadata from other shadow libraries, and that's, I guess, the archival aspect of that specific platform. Um, and then you have, I mean, I found in my while doing my research for my thesis that there's also, malicious shadow library sites that make take use of the radical openness that they're sort of built on, and then put in stuff like spyware or pornographic commercials or casino commercials with no
Mm.
intention of spreading literature or sort of adhering to the
Mm.
to the goals of the original platform. So this radical openness has two sides, uh, obviously, and I mean, there's always going to be bad people that make use of this.
Mm.
Considering that it is technologically simple to create a shadow library site, and it's
Mm.
easy to make money off of a site like that if you have a bunch of commercials because the traffic is going to be, especially if you
Enormous.
use one of the names, you can just create a new said library domain and just say it's said
Mm.
library and use the same
Mm.
HTML code to build an interface that looks similar. But then maybe you put in a bunch of commercials or ads and you are able to monetize it in a way that was not originally intended. So
Mhm.
that's definitely
You Yeah,
something.
you mentioned peer-to-peer, but I don't think any of these are actually peer-to-peer. But the parallel, it seems worth looking at the parallel with Napster. The people of a certain generation, so me included, remember sort of a sudden rise of Napster, which was a way of copying copyrighted music, and Napster sort of disappeared almost as fast as it had arisen. But for a while, sort of music became a kind of free for all. Do you think there are parallels? Do you think the same is likely to happen with these shadow libraries?
That they'll fizzle out.
Yeah.
Oh, perhaps, but the shifts that have to happen within the publishing sphere are so immense that I think, oh, it'll take some time. I mean, the open access initiative has been going on, what is it, 25 years today?
Mm.
Uh, 26, we're in a new year. Um, so, you know, and for that amount of time, there's been shadow libraries equivalents. It's important to know there's a longer history of shadow libraries. They come from a certain practice that was originated in the Soviet Union called the samizdat publishing, which
Mm.
is a way to circumvent Soviet censorship and created these sort of autonomous, I guess, or whatever you want to call it, publishing houses that published
Mm.
paper books originally.
Mm.
But the first online library that I know of is called samizdat.info or something like that. So, I mean,
Mm.
there's a clear lineage here. So, there's a longer history to speak of. That predates the open access initiatives as well. So, I'm not so sure. People like free stuff, simply.
Mm.
And I think it's something that I always say when I talk about shadow libraries is it's hard to think about them without uh, putting some regard into the principle of least effort, which sort of I think governs most of the users of shadow libraries
Mm.
across the
On that
world.
subject, yeah, on that subject, least effort, I think absolutely central. Some people argue that the reason for the rise of Spotify is simply the sort of the sheer convenience of being able to get all your music in one place without having to traipse down to the record store and buy individual CDs or vinyl. Do you think there's a moral there for shadow libraries
In terms of,
in terms of accessible, in terms of ease of finding content,
well, I mean,
least effort?
I think that's their main unique selling point. I mean, could compare getting a book from a university library, a digital book, I might add, from a university library in comparison to one from Anna's archive. On Anna's archive, you go in, you search for the book, you press download, you wait a few seconds, and then it's on your computer. The university library, you log on to your university library platform, you search into the catalog, you get a link to the book, if the book exists, mind you. You click, you get into a publisher site, you might have to download, log on again, and then you're inside this very constricted, often reader that is governed by the logic of the publisher who holds the rights to the book. And this means in some cases, oh, I can only borrow it for 6 hours. Uh, I can only borrow it for 4 days. Sometimes it means you can't download it and read it offline. And there are all these sort of minor inconveniences which makes it, I mean, almost not a competition for the shadow library. Here's something where I can literally, said library has a button that says download to my Kindle. You know, we're talking about a whole different kind of user interface and a
Mm.
kinder user interface that is only there and accessible due to the fact that it is disregarding copyright
Mhm. Mm.
or yeah. So
You use the phrase in your thesis, the paradox of legitimacy. Sort of, what do you mean by that?
so this can be sort of boiled down to a series of different things. I think the most important one is what shadow libraries do for academia. So um, what they do is they give access and sort of fix the problem of access for academics who either can't be bothered or in this stressful situation, and this is probably the end of the type of academics you see in from richer institutions or richer countries. They give this ease. Um, and in poor institutions or poor countries, they give access that is not accessible in any other way. So that's one half. And then the second half, they don't really solve any issue. And this is where you can start going into the critique of legitimacy of what are they actually doing except reproducing the same problems of the academic publishing industry that we have today. So some people may say, okay, well, we have to publish in this and this journal, otherwise we can't get this and this reach. The journal itself is not going to uh, suffer significantly from the existence of shadow libraries because at the end of the day, uh, researchers are going to want to publish in that specific journal, and the system is intact. So, despite the fact that these shadow libraries exist, they aren't always this emancipatory uh, thing that they are sometimes painted out to be. So this creates this what I like to call paradox of legitimacy, which complicates and I think problematizes the shadow libraries in a way that I think we should do. Yeah.
One side effect of these huge corpora is that do you think it's the case that Gen AI, the major commercial LLMs, are making use of that corpus to train their models?
I don't think I know. I mean, this is a big thing. Meta just won, I think, a lawsuit not too long ago on the basis of this specific question that they've used. I believe it was a data set called the Pile or Books 3 or something, which contained copyrighted literary works, not just academic, but fiction as well. And I mean, sites like Anna's Archive offer curated data sets for language model companies, so to develop large language models. So I think it's definitely, and I mean, and this is also a part of this radical openness. You can make use of it in a variety of different ways beyond just democratizing knowledge, even though that may be the main motivation, or marketing wise towards their public, the main motivation. There are other ways to make use of these very significant collections. Yeah.
Are there any statistics available to sort of to give an idea of how widely these the shadow libraries are used?
There are, um, however, they are often curated by the shadow libraries, and the largest ones are from Library Genesis. I think the years they're quite old, I might add, but the years for Library Genesis are 2015, 2014, something like that. And I know Sci-Hub has four data sets, one 2011, 2013, 2015, 2016, and then the entire year of 2017. They have been on the Sci-Hub website teasing about statistics that are more recent, but those teasings have been posted for, I'd say, a good 3 or 4 years. So they haven't come out yet. But based on those statistics that we have available, we can see that use is widespread. It's in essentially every country in the world, and it is more or less significant. Obviously, the countries with more people download more, um, but it is widespread. And I mean, it's an old article now. I think it's 10 years old. But John Bohannon, who was a journalist for Nature, wrote an article together with Alexandra Elbakayan using her 2015 2016 data set titled "Who's Downloading Pirated Papers? Everyone," which I think is that's pretty much it. And if you tell someone about a shadow library, either they don't know about it, which is eh, quite common. I don't know what it is, or I know about it and I use it. And if you don't know about it and you get shown it, you will eventually at some point use it. Now, this is not, I'm not saying you should
Condone it.
use shadow libraries, but
Yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. One interesting statistic, I think this came suggested that Sci-Hub articles, when an article was available on Sci-Hub, it got downloaded more frequently or more times than articles not available. This is one of the arguments in favor of open access. The number of downloads. Do you think that's convincing?
I think it's convincing. I think that's from a person. This is I know that there's articles that have said that citations are higher due to the fact that their availability in say for example Sci-Hub, and it was quite funny. I did a study where I down checked because Sci-Hub has this very interesting, or used to at least have this very interesting little HTML feed where they would show the latest download paper, and I thought, oh, that's something fun. You can do something fun with. So I made a dump of that. So what it gave you was the DOI and the title. With the DOI and the title, you can see what's being downloaded every second of every day. And I ran that with a colleague from the humanities lab in Umeå, where I did my PhD. And he wrote this little script in Linux, which took a dump of this. I tried to do it in Python first, but I got kicked out because I am not that good of a developer, and they have quite good protection. But he managed to find a workaround. So every 5 minutes for 2 months, over a summer, he made a little dump of this, and I found that one of the most downloaded articles were about this deep sea creatures, or about frogs in deep sea spaces, which sounds very weird, but it was actually led to a tweet that a person had written about a frog on the bottom of a lake. And then one of the answers to this tweet, which had, you know, extreme numbers, the original tweet had extreme numbers. One of the links to this was that specific article. Wait, now I've kind of forgot the question. And I got the wrong one.
This is
But
when,
yes, yes,
when,
yes,
yeah.
yes. So, getting people interested in research is one thing, but getting access to research is another thing. And when you have the access in that very simple way, just a link away, obviously the spread is going to be significantly larger. And this is an article that was previously protected by paywalls, or protected is a weird word in this situation, but you get what I mean. It was a
Yeah.
paywall article, and would probably not have been downloaded, 150,000 times over a summer if it wasn't for this tweet,
Mm.
or specifically if it wasn't for the fact that you could access this article through Sci-Hub. Now,
Mm.
this is a logic that is probably easily transferable to a series of different fields in a series of different contexts. Say we're talking about a subject, okay, I can very easily link to Sci-Hub, and then a larger amount of people can have access to it. And this is, I guess, brings back to this open access argument that you initiated the question with. So probably there are, I mean, logically, considering this, there is weight to the argument that a paper that is available on a shadow library will get a wider spread if the original paper is in a paywalled
Okay,
journal.
let's talk a bit about the as a librarian. I'm sure you're familiar with the idea of which has been talked about for years, the universal library, and you know about the history of the right to borrow books from libraries, which has been established for print titles for many years, but is nowhere near so clear for digital content. And I'm sure you followed the series of lawsuits against the Internet Archive.
Oh yeah.
So do you think that that shadow libraries represent a kind of like a de facto, in fact, they're the closest we come to a universal library?
Absolutely. Yeah, especially Anna's archive. I wouldn't say so much. A few years ago, I wouldn't say that, but I think Anna's archive have done something quite unique in the shadow library space by collecting other shadow libraries. And I think this is something that has not really been done to the extent that they're doing it right now. So I would say yes, this is the closest we've come, and I think further than we've ever come as a species to having a one-stop shop for sort of universal knowledge. Uh, and this, I mean, I should add that this also includes fiction and non-fiction that works under different publishing logics in comparison to academic publishing. So,
So,
absolutely, yeah.
so do you agree with then the sort of Anna's Archive claims I've picked up from their website to preserve and liberate human knowledge?
I believe that's what they believe. um, sure, I guess. But it comes to a point where the collecting that Anna's archive specifically does becomes a little manic. if you get what I mean. It's obviously curated to some degree, but when you start reaching 15, 20 million books and just adding books for the sake of adding books, curation will always get like will always be second to hoarding, you know? So while I do agree that they are the closest thing we have to a universal library, I sort of question the purpose of a universal library. Yeah.
It reminds me of an anecdote. I don't know how fictitious this, how true this was, but it sounded convincing. That I remember talking to somebody from the Bodleian Library who said that when I think it was Microsoft came to digitize lots of books, they took one look at the open shelves and they said, "Well, we'll take the ones on the bottom, but the ones on the top they're too high up. That's we'd have health and safety issues, so we'll we'll scan the ones at the bottom."
Yeah. But
So
it also brings us back to this beautiful the no, novel by Borges, you know, about the Library of Babel.
yes,
What's
yeah.
the purpose of a library like that, you know? And I think that's even if this is no Library of Babel, this is significantly more curated, and it's got the metadata and so on and so forth, and a key. We It's reaching a point where it's more like, okay, we have 20 million books, so what? Uh,
Yeah,
a little bit,
yeah,
yeah. But that's a
yeah.
personal opinion.
No, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Another claim from some of the shadow libraries is that they have a kind of a Marxist goal of sort of making stuff available as sort of to all. Do you think there's any merit in that?
I think specifically Alexandra Elbakayan, I think she genuinely believes it.
Mm.
I mean, she's working off a principle of Leninism, which is rooted in Robert K. Merton has this fantastic idea of the communism of science. Uh, so I think once again that she believes it, but I think once again we come back to this paradox of legitimacy where you're making available, but you're not changing the circumstances of production, which are sort of essential when you're talking from a Marxist perspective.
Mm.
Um, so there's some weight to it, and obviously it's throwing wrenches into the machines.
Mm.
Uh, but you have to build a new machine, and you have to make sure that the
Mm.
circumstances around the machines and the workers are different in order for it to fully sort of go all the way through in your Marxist analysis.
Mm.
Um, so there's some weight to it, and I think in certain circumstances it is a bit more clear than in others. The very large platforms, I don't see fully conforming to a Marxist ideal, like I
Mm.
presume, or I would say. But the smaller platforms, or in fact, publishers that work more closer with researchers in a variety of different ways, that are more, less usy, lack of a better word,
Mm.
uh, are much closer to that sort of ideal than something like Library Genesis or Anna's Archive. Even
Mm.
though the administrators might have those uh, ideologies.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You mentioned, I think you mentioned earlier something about collective working, some of the tools provided by these platforms. How genuine do you think those are? Because, of course, best academic practice is all about, in principle, sharing knowledge, and we're all familiar with the idea of sort of ResearchGate, which, in principle, you can access anything by just requesting it
Yeah.
from the author. So, do you think there's an element of that in operation through the shadow libraries?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I just think it doesn't work so much at the point of producer of said piece of knowledge. It's rather a collective work to create the shadow library. So this can mean in a variety of things. It can mean donating in a very simple way to make sure that the servers stay up. That's a very simple way of being a part of being part of the big collaborative process. But then there's also things such as uh, making sure the metadata looks good, making sure that publications exist, looking for collections in other areas, large collections, and making sure that Zit Library or Anna's Archive, I'm specifically talking about Anna's Archive now, uh, can get can get it. Anna's Archive has something very interesting. thing called bounties. So they put out bounties. Sometimes they're voluntary, so you get no money. Sometimes they're at the tune of $10,000. We can get a large amount of money to do different things with their collections to make them either more accessible or get a better overview of the collection. So this requires a technical know-how, which is reserved to a very small amount of people. So, and then questions of cybersecurity, beefing up their cybersecurity, stuff like that. So they often ask their users or the general public, I assume, to make use of their talents and also pay them as part of it. As well, said library has these initiatives. I don't know if anyone's used them, and I would very much like to get in touch with someone who's used them, but they offer economic assistance to educational institutions that don't have the means to perform the work that they need to. So you can actually write an application to the said library, and they will send you books or both physical and digital to sort of mitigate the situation that you're in, whether it's economic or a question of access or what it can be. So yeah, there is this very strong collectivist ideal within the shadow libraries, I think, that is hard to argue against, even though that it sometimes sort of boils down to selling data sets to large language model companies.
Mm.
It's still something that is created together within a community.
Hmm.
It's not just
You
very
meant,
top down. It has this bottom up perspective
yeah.
embedded into the structure of the platform as well.
Mm. You mentioned that that in some ways the shadow libraries sort of perpetuate, sort of a mirror, the sort of the same kind of framework of the commercial world. And one of the things that the commercial world does is there are several initiatives to provide favourable sort of access on cheaper terms to disadvantaged lower wealth countries. So you could
Yes.
say surely that the shadow libraries are just taking that one step further and giving free access to
Yeah. I mean, pretty much. Yeah. Yeah.
do you not? I mean, do you not think that might be sort of some one reason for sort of if they were seen as a way of providing that access, they could actually be funded by publishers to provide some sort of access that wouldn't otherwise be available to institutions that couldn't afford the subscriptions.
I mean, yeah, but I wouldn't see the motivations behind the publishers to do it except for, a good tax write-off. Uh, so maybe, but I think the shadow libraries are an eyesore in almost every publisher's eye. They do not like shadow libraries, and I've had the wonderful opportunity of speaking with uh, publishers that are not necessarily part of the force for good. Lack of better words,
Mm,
not to name names, but I think everyone who listens and what sort of
mm,
publishers I'm talking about, and they're they are very much against shadow libraries in every single way,
mm,
even though they still have, they can brag about 40% profit margins. It
mm,
could be 42%,
mm,
if it weren't for these shadow libraries. So they put a lot of effort into hunting them down and shutting them down.
mm.
So I do not see a lot of cooperation between shadow libraries, and they're very much each other's antagonists.
Hmm. You mentioned open access and how open access sort of hasn't been the sort of perhaps the intended success, but isn't a diamond open? Do you think that diamond open access might be one solution to shadow libraries?
Yeah, I mean that's what I meant when I was talking about these sort of Marxist ideals that are sometimes talked about in shadow library circumstances. I think the legal alternatives, such as diamond open access, is in terms of what it does for research, is significantly better at fixing what's broken rather than just circumventing it. Um, so yeah, absolutely. And I mean, but the problem once again lies in the fact that the publishing system is so deeply set in its ways, and this is not just publishers, but it's also researchers and to some extent libraries as well. Um, so we need all three to at the same time make a significant change, and I think that's why it's taken 26 years and probably will take. I mean, even though during these years we've seen significant, I mean, just now, what is it, 50-60% of all research published is open access. That is a big move from how it
Mm,
looked like before.
mm,
But we still have issues of double dipping. We still have issues of the hybrid journals. We still have issues of, okay, why is open access so goddamn
mm,
expensive? What does
mm,
openness mean in this context even?
mm,
And I think these are questions that sort of bubble and haven't really been resolved yet, in a way, in a sort of wholesale way. And I think they
mm.
can't be resolved as long as the publishing market looks like it does today. And I don't think shadow libraries or individual institutions or individuals can do anything against it. I think it needs significant supranational regulation in order for it
Mm.
to really be mitigated. And we've seen attempts with Plan S and so on and so forth, but I think there needs to be way more radical, in
So do you
terms of.
think on that point, there seem to be sort of small pockets. Diamond open access is great, but very small scale. The rise of open educational resources is another, I think, fascinating example of genuine, if you like, community
Yeah,
building, where the researchers and in this case institutions sort of coming together to sort of to create alternatives. So do you think can you envisage any kind of way forward with reference to shadow libraries, the sort of what could potentially happen in that way between the agencies you described, the publishers, the researchers, the institutions?
I think it's well, one way is to do and I think that's probably the most fruitful thing you can do as a researcher today is create the spaces where you are sort of cutting away the publisher, or specifically the larger publishers, and creating these smaller scale initiatives. I mean, a mass of smaller scale initiatives becomes a large scale initiative. So continuing the path that we're on right now, and I think there's excellent proof of that in um, communities such as the Radical Open Access Collective, for example, and the ones that you mentioned, and the Diamond Open Access journals, and institutional publishing, institutional repositories, which I think are, this gem of a thing that needs to be universal, which could help, or is the building blocks for solving it. But then in solving it, I can't dare. I mean, this is something people that are way smarter than me have been trying to do for way longer, and
Mm.
it's also not really my area of expertise. But I genuinely think that the continuing of the small scale initiatives is really the way forward, and creating communities around them, in order to, so that you don't feel so alone in your own
Mm.
institution or library or your own publishing house, or so on and so forth.
Well, I don't think we've heard the last of shadow libraries, and but I think the work that you've done in documenting and discussing shadow libraries has been invaluable in sort of bringing these issues to bear. And even if we don't have in this brief podcast a sort of a solution to all the world's academic publishing problems, I look forward to hearing more, to hearing you continue in this vein and publishing more in this sector. So thanks very much for your time.
Well, thank you.